The fever had taken her in the night, and by dawn, Lydia Lancaster knew the wagon train would not wait for her to recover. She had woken to silence, the kind that only comes when dozens of people and animals have vanished from a place they once occupied. Her body felt like it was made of lead, every muscle aching, her skin alternating between burning hot and ice cold. The small tent she had been quarantined in stood alone in a clearing that should have been filled with wagons, livestock, and the bustling energy of families heading west. Instead, there was nothing but trampled grass and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Lydia tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. She was 20 years old, and this journey to Oregon had been meant to start her new life after her parents died of cholera the previous winter. Her aunt and uncle had taken her in reluctantly, seeing her as another mouth to feed rather than family. When they joined the wagon train in Independence, Missouri, 3 months ago in the spring of 1878, she had felt hope for the first time in months. Now, abandoned somewhere in the Texas panhandle with nothing but the clothes on her back and a single canteen of water, that hope seemed like a cruel joke. She crawled out of the tent into the harsh sunlight of early June. The heat was already oppressive, and she could see the wagon tracks leading west, the direction everyone she knew had gone without her. Her aunt had left a small bundle, she discovered, a meager offering of hardtack, some dried meat, and a blanket. No note, no explanation, just supplies that might keep her alive for a few days if she was lucky. Tears stung her eyes, but Lydia refused to let them fall. She had survived losing her parents. She had survived her aunt's cold indifference and her uncle's harsh words. She would survive this too, somehow. The first day passed in a haze of fever and desperation. She managed to take down the tent with shaking hands, knowing the canvas might provide shelter from the elements. She drank sparingly from the canteen, unsure when she might find water again. The landscape around her was relatively flat with patches of scrub brush and the occasional mesquite tree, offering little shade and less comfort. By the second day, her fever had broken, but hunger gnawed at her stomach. She rationed the hardtack and jerky, making each piece last as long as possible. She tried to remember everything her father had taught her about surviving in unfamiliar territory, but he had been a shopkeeper, not a frontiersman. His knowledge had been limited to what he had read in books and heard from travelers. On the third day, Lydia knew she had to make a choice. She could stay here and wait for another wagon train to pass, which might take weeks or months, or she could try to walk to the nearest town. She had heard the trail boss mention Tascosa, a rough settlement in the Texas panhandle that served as a supply point for ranchers and cowboys. It could not be more than 20 or 30 miles from here, though she had no map and no real sense of direction beyond following the wagon tracks backward. She was gathering her meager supplies, preparing to set out on foot when she heard it. The sound of hoofbeats, steady and rhythmic, coming from the south. Lydia's heart leaped with hope and fear in equal measure. Out here, a stranger could be salvation or danger, and she had no way of knowing which until it was too late. The rider appeared over a small rise, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. As he drew closer, Lydia could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle, wearing a dusty brown hat, a faded blue shirt, and worn leather chaps. 2 horses followed behind his mount, both laden with supplies. He was alone, which was unusual for this territory where traveling in groups offered protection from bandits and hostile encounters. When he was about 50 yards away, he slowed his horse to a walk, clearly having spotted her tent and belongings. Lydia stood up straighter, trying to look stronger than she felt, her hand instinctively moving to the small knife her father had given her, tucked into her boot. The cowboy pulled his horse to a stop about 10 feet away and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and eyes that were a striking shade of blue-green. Despite his dusty, road-worn appearance, there was something solid and dependable about him. "Madam," he said, his voice a low drawl that spoke of long days under the Texas sun, "you look like you might be in some trouble." Lydia lifted her chin, pride warring with desperation. "My wagon train moved on without me. I was ill, and when I recovered, they were gone." Something flickered in his eyes, anger maybe, or disgust at the people who would abandon a young woman alone in this harsh land. He dismounted in one fluid motion, and Lydia tensed, but he kept a respectful distance. "Name's Yates Turner," he said. "I've been running supplies between Dodge City and some of the ranches down here. Was heading back north when I saw your camp." "Lydia Lancaster," she replied, studying him carefully. He did not have the look of a drifter or an outlaw. His clothes were worn but well maintained, his horses healthy and well cared for. His eyes were direct but not threatening. Yates looked around the abandoned campsite, taking in the single tent, the pitiful pile of supplies, and Lydia's pale, drawn face. "How long you been out here alone?" "3 days," Lydia admitted. "I was planning to walk to Tascosa. I heard it mentioned during the journey." "Tascosa's about 25 miles northeast of here," Yates said, his tone making it clear what he thought of her chances of making it that far on foot with almost no supplies. "You'd never make it in this heat, not with what you got there." Lydia's shoulders sagged despite her best efforts to stay strong. "I do not have much choice. I cannot stay here." Yates was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to the horizon and back again. She could see him weighing his options, calculating risks and responsibilities. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm with decision. "I was heading up to Dodge City, got a delivery to make and supplies to pick up. But Tascosa's not too far out of my way. I can take you there, get you settled someplace safe before I continue north." Relief flooded through Lydia so intensely that her knees nearly buckled again. "I do not have money to pay you," she said honestly. "I had a few dollars, but my aunt took my purse before they left." The muscle in Yates's jaw tightened. "I am not asking for payment. No decent person leaves a woman stranded out here. Let me help you pack up and we can make it to Tascosa by tomorrow afternoon if we start now and camp overnight." Lydia wanted to cry, to laugh, to collapse with relief, but instead she simply nodded. "Thank you. I do not know how to repay such kindness." "You can repay me by staying alive," Yates said with a slight smile that softened his weather-beaten features. "Let's get moving before we lose more daylight." They worked together to pack up her meager belongings. Yates was efficient and respectful, never touching her without permission, always maintaining a proper distance. He secured her tent and supplies on one of his pack horses, then offered her his canteen. "Drink," he urged. "You look half dead from dehydration. I've got plenty more water." The water was warm but tasted like heaven. Lydia drank deeply, feeling strength begin to return to her limbs. Yates pulled some dried fruit from his saddlebag and handed it to her as well. "Eat while we ride. You need to get your strength back." He helped her mount one of the pack horses, which he had rearranged to accommodate a rider. Lydia had ridden before but not often, and she felt awkward and uncertain in the saddle. Yates noticed and adjusted the stirrups for her, his movements quick and practiced. "You'll get used to it after a few miles," he assured her. "Just let yourself move with the horse's rhythm." They set out northeast, following paths that only Yates seemed able to see in the seemingly endless grassland. As they rode, he pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a dry creek bed, a stand of cottonwood trees that indicated underground water. He was teaching her, Lydia realized, giving her knowledge that might save her life if she ever found herself alone out here again. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but the steady movement of the horse created a slight breeze that made the heat bearable. Lydia studied the man riding ahead of her, noticing things she had been too overwhelmed to see before. The way he sat his horse with unconscious grace, the careful way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the gentleness with which he handled the animals. "How long have you been riding these routes?" she asked, needing to break the silence that had stretched between them. Yates glanced back at her. "About 5 years now. Started when I was 20 after my parents died. They had a small ranch, but I was not much for ranching. Liked moving, seeing new places. Figured out I could make a living hauling supplies where they were needed." "Is it not dangerous traveling alone?" "Can be," he admitted. "But I know the land pretty well by now, know where the trouble spots are, where to find water and shelter. And I am careful about which jobs I take and who I work with." "You have family waiting for you somewhere?" Yates shook his head. "No family left. It is just me and the horses now. What about you? You said your aunt and uncle left you behind. Any other family in Oregon?" Lydia's throat tightened. "No, my parents died last winter. My aunt and uncle took me in, but they never wanted me. I was just a burden to them. I suppose when I got sick, it seemed like a convenient excuse to be rid of me." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She had been trying so hard not to think about what her relatives had done, the betrayal of being left behind like unwanted baggage. "That is a hard thing," Yates said quietly. "Family should take care of each other, especially in hard times. What they did was not right." His simple validation of her pain meant more than Lydia expected. She blinked back tears and focused on the landscape around them, trying to memorize the details the way Yates seemed to know them instinctively. As the sun began to lower in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink, Yates led them to a spot near a small creek where water still flowed despite the summer heat. He helped Lydia dismount, steadying her when her legs wobbled from hours in the saddle. "You did well for your first long ride," he said approvingly. "Most people are complaining after the first hour." "I was too grateful to be rescued to complain," Lydia replied with a tired smile. Yates set about making camp with practiced efficiency. He unsaddled the horses and let them drink from the creek before hobbling them where they could graze. He gathered deadwood for a fire and got it started with a few strikes of flint and steel. From his supplies, he produced a small pot, coffee, beans, and bacon. "Sit," he instructed Lydia, who had been hovering uncertainly, unsure how to help. "You have been through enough. Let me cook tonight." Lydia sank down onto her blanket, watching him work. The smell of bacon sizzling over the fire made her stomach growl loudly enough that Yates heard and grinned. "Food will be ready soon," he promised. As darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead, they ate together in companionable silence. The beans and bacon were simple fare, but to Lydia, who had been rationing hardtack for 3 days, it was a feast. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it warmed her from the inside out. "Tell me about Tascosa," she said after she had eaten her fill. "What kind of town is it?" Yates poured himself another cup of coffee and leaned back against his saddle. "It is a rough place, not going to lie to you. Started as a trading post and grew from there. Lots of cowboys, freighters, buffalo hunters passing through. There is a general store, a few saloons, some houses. It sits on the Canadian River, which makes it a natural stopping point." "Is there work there for a woman?" "Depends on what kind of work you are looking for," Yates said carefully. "There is a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Henderson. She is tough but fair. might need help with cooking or cleaning. The general store sometimes needs help too, though the owner can be prickly. And there are always ranches around looking for cooks and housekeepers. Lydia absorbed this information, trying to imagine her future in this unknown town. I can cook and clean and sew. I helped my mother run our household before she died. I am not afraid of hard work. That is good, Yates said. You will need that kind of determination out here. Texas is not kind to the weak. I have noticed, Lydia said dryly, and was rewarded with a genuine laugh from Yates. The sound transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. Lydia found herself smiling in response, feeling something warm unfold in her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee or the fire. They talked late into the night, sharing stories about their lives. Yates told her about growing up on a small ranch, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the harsh winter that had taken both his parents within days of each other. Lydia spoke of her childhood in a small Missouri town, her father's shop, her mother's garden, the community she had lost when fever swept through and changed everything. We have both lost a lot, Yates observed, staring into the fire. But we are still here, Lydia replied. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Yates said, meeting her eyes across the flames. When it was time to sleep, Yates laid out his bedroll on one side of the fire and made sure Lydia was comfortable on the other side with her blanket and tent canvas for extra warmth against the night chill. You sleep, he told her. I will keep watch for a while, make sure we do not have any unwanted visitors. Visitors? Lydia asked nervously. Just animals mostly, Yates assured her. Coyotes, maybe a bear if we are unlucky, but the fire should keep them away. Nothing to worry about. Despite his reassurances, Lydia found it hard to sleep at first. Every sound made her tense, every rustle of grass or crack of a twig. But gradually, lulled by the warmth of the fire and the steady presence of Yates keeping watch, she drifted off into the deepest sleep she had experienced since falling ill. She woke once in the night to find Yates still awake, sitting with his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. When he noticed she was awake, he gave her a reassuring nod, and she fell back asleep feeling safer than she had in months. Morning came with the sounds of birds and the smell of coffee brewing. Lydia opened her eyes to find Yates already up, the fire rekindled, breakfast cooking. He moved quietly, efficiently, a man used to taking care of himself in the wilderness. Morning, he said when he saw her stirring. We have got some hard riding ahead if we want to make Tascosa by afternoon. Better eat up. They ate quickly, packed up camp, and were on the trail as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The landscape began to change as they traveled, becoming slightly more varied with more trees, and the occasional ravine cutting through the plains. Yates explained that they were getting closer to the Canadian River, which ran near Tascosa. As they rode, Lydia found herself studying Yates more closely. There was something about him that drew her attention beyond simple gratitude for being rescued. He was competent and calm, never rushing but never wasting time either. He spoke when there was something worth saying, and was comfortable with silence when there was not. He treated her with a respect she had rarely experienced, never condescending, never inappropriate, just solidly reliable. You are staring, Yates said without turning around, amusement coloring his voice. Lydia felt her cheeks flush. I am sorry, I was just thinking. About what? About how lucky I was that you came along when you did. A few more days out there alone and I do not think I would have survived. Yates turned in his saddle to look at her properly. You are stronger than you think, Lydia Lancaster. You survived being abandoned, survived the fever, survived 3 days alone. That takes strength that a lot of people do not have. His words, spoken with such conviction, made Lydia sit a little straighter in the saddle. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was stronger than she had believed. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat some jerky and dried fruit. Yates pointed to a line of trees in the distance. That is the Canadian River. Tascosa sits about 5 miles east of here along the north bank. We will be there in a couple of hours. Lydia felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Tascosa represented safety and the possibility of a new start, but it also meant saying goodbye to Yates, and she found herself surprisingly reluctant to do so. As they drew closer to the town, they began to see signs of civilization. Cattle grazing in the distance, a few riders in the far distance checking fences, the rutted tracks of wagon roads converging toward the settlement. Then Tascosa itself came into view, a collection of adobe and wooden buildings spread along the river, looking weathered but permanent in a way that spoke of human determination to carve out a life in this harsh land. They rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from the people they passed. Lydia was acutely aware of how she must look after days of illness and travel, her dress dirty and wrinkled, her hair escaping from its braid, her face sunburned despite Yates lending her his spare hat. Yates led them to a 2-story building with a sign that read Henderson's boarding house. He dismounted and came to help Lydia down, his hand steadying her waist as she slid from the saddle. "This is the place I told you about," he said. "Mrs. Henderson is strict, but she runs a decent house. Let me introduce you." They climbed the steps to the wide porch, and Yates knocked firmly on the door. It opened to reveal a tall, stern-looking woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Yates Turner," she said in a voice that managed to be both welcoming and reproachful. "I heard you were passing through, but I did not expect you at my door. Who is this?" "Mrs. Henderson. This is Miss Lydia Lancaster. I found her abandoned by her wagon train 3 days south of here. She needs a place to stay and possibly work if you have any available." Mrs. Henderson's sharp eyes softened slightly as she took in Lydia's bedraggled appearance. "Abandoned, you say? What kind of people leave a young woman alone in this country?" "The kind who do not deserve to be called family," Yates said grimly. "Well, come in, both of you," Mrs. Henderson said, stepping back to allow them entry. "Miss Lancaster, you look half-starved and completely done in. Yates, bring her things inside." The interior of the boarding house was surprisingly pleasant, with clean wooden floors, simple but sturdy furniture, and lace curtains at the windows. It smelled of bread baking and lemon oil, the sense of domesticity and care. Mrs. Henderson led Lydia to a chair in the parlor and disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a glass of cool water and a plate of bread and butter. "Eat," she commanded. "Slowly. If you have not been eating regularly, I do not want you making yourself sick." Lydia ate gratefully, while Mrs. Henderson and Yates spoke in low tones near the doorway. She could not hear everything they said, but she caught enough to understand that Yates was explaining the situation in more detail, probably vouching for her character and work ethic. Finally, Mrs. Henderson came over and sat down across from Lydia. "Yates tells me you can cook and clean and that you are willing to work hard. Is that true?" "Yes, madam," Lydia said firmly. "I helped run my parents' household before they died. I can cook, clean, do laundry, mend clothes, tend a garden, and keep accounts if needed." "Can you handle difficult people? Because I get all sorts through here, cowboys fresh off the range who have forgotten their manners, gamblers, drifters, occasionally some rougher types. I do not tolerate nonsense in my house, but you need a firm hand and a strong spine to work here." Lydia thought about her aunt's constant criticism, her uncle's harsh words, the loneliness of being unwanted in the only home she had left. "I have dealt with difficult people, Mrs. Henderson. I can handle myself." Mrs. Henderson studied her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "All right. I will give you a trial period. Room and board plus $3 a week to start. If you work out, we will discuss raising your wages after a month. I expect hard work, honesty, and discretion." "Can you agree to those terms?" "Yes, madam," Lydia said, relief flooding through her. "Thank you for giving me this chance." "Thank Yates," Mrs. Henderson said. "He does not bring people to my door often, so when he does, I pay attention. He says you are trustworthy, and I have learned to trust his judgment." Lydia looked over to where Yates stood by the door, his hat in his hands. Their eyes met, and she saw something there that made her heart skip. A warmth, a connection that felt like more than just the bond between rescuer and rescued. Mrs. Henderson showed Lydia to a small room on the second floor, simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. To Lydia, who had been sleeping on the ground for days, it looked like paradise. "Get yourself cleaned up and rested," Mrs. Henderson said. "You can start work tomorrow morning. I will have breakfast ready at 6, and we will discuss your duties then." After Mrs. Henderson left, Lydia returned downstairs to find Yates still waiting. He had brought her bundle of belongings inside and set them neatly by the staircase. "So you are all set?" he asked. "Thanks to you," Lydia said. "I do not know how I can ever repay you for everything you have done." Yates shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "You do not owe me anything, Lydia. I just did what any decent person should do." "But not everyone would have done it," Lydia insisted. "You changed your route, spent time and supplies to help a complete stranger. That means something." They stood there in the boarding house parlor, the air between them charged with something neither quite knew how to name. Lydia realized she did not want him to leave, did not want to say goodbye to this man who had appeared like salvation when she needed it most. "Will you be staying in Tascosa long?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "I need to finish my delivery run to Dodge City," Yates said slowly. "But I come through Tascosa fairly regularly. Every few weeks or so, depending on the jobs I take. I could stop by, see how you are settling in." "I would like that," Lydia said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised her. Yates smiled, that transformative expression that lit up his whole face. "Then I will make sure to stop by. You take care of yourself, Lydia Lancaster, and if you ever need anything, you tell Mrs. Henderson to get word to me. I will come." "I will," Lydia promised. He settled his hat on his head and tipped it to her in farewell, then walked out the door to where his horses waited. Lydia followed him onto the porch and watched as he mounted up, gathered the pack horse's leads, and turned to give her one last wave before riding out of town. She stood there long after he disappeared from view, her hand raised in farewell, feeling both grateful for her rescue and strangely bereft at his departure. The next weeks passed in a blur of hard work and adjustment. Mrs. Henderson ran a tight ship, expecting her boarders and employees to maintain high standards of cleanliness and behavior. Lydia threw herself into the work, scrubbing floors, cooking meals, doing laundry, changing linens, and serving food to the varied collection of people who passed through the boarding house. She met cowboys who smelled of leather and cattle, merchants traveling between towns, the occasional family moving west, and once, a circuit preacher who blessed everyone at dinner whether they wanted it or not. Some were polite, some were rough, but Mrs. Henderson's strict rules kept most of them in line. Lydia discovered she was good at this work. She could manage multiple tasks, keep the kitchen running smoothly, and handle difficult customers with a combination of firmness and courtesy that earned Mrs. Henderson's approval. By the end of her first month, her wages were raised to $4 a week, and she was given more responsibilities. Tascosa itself was exactly as Yates had described it, rough but functional, a place where people came to do business, resupply, and move on. The town had a general store run by a gruff man named Mr. Peterson, several saloons that Lydia avoided, a livery stable, a blacksmith, and scattered houses and businesses. It was not home, not yet, but it was becoming familiar. The other women in town were few but formed a tight community. There was Mrs. Henderson, of course, and the doctor's wife, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had married the town's physician and who faced prejudice with quiet dignity. There was also Miss Sarah Winters, who ran the small schoolhouse, and a few ranch wives who came into town periodically for supplies. Lydia was gradually accepted into this community, though she said little about her past beyond the basic facts of being orphaned and abandoned. Mrs. Henderson must have spread the word about how Lydia had come to Tascosa, because people treated her with a combination of sympathy and respect that made settling in easier. But through it all, through the long days of work and the slow building of a new life, Lydia found her thoughts returning again and again to Yates Turner. She wondered where he was, whether his delivery to Dodge City had gone smoothly, whether he was safe. She remembered the kindness in his eyes, the steady competence of his hands, the way he had made her feel valued and protected. 6 weeks after Yates had left her in Tascosa, Lydia was in the boarding house kitchen preparing dinner when she heard a familiar voice in the front parlor. Her heart leaped, and she had to restrain herself from running out immediately. Instead, she took a moment to remove her apron, smooth her hair, and wipe the flour from her hands before walking calmly into the parlor. Yates stood there talking with Mrs. Henderson, his hat in his hands, looking travel-worn but healthy. When he saw Lydia, his whole face lit up with a smile that made her breath catch. "Miss Lancaster," he said formally, though his eyes were warm. "It is good to see you looking so well." "Mr. Turner," Lydia replied, matching his formality, though she wanted to laugh with the sheer joy of seeing him again. "Welcome back to Tascosa." Mrs. Henderson looked between them with sharp, knowing eyes. "Yates needs a room for a few days while he conducts some business in town." "I trust that will not be a problem." "Of course not," Lydia said, perhaps too quickly. Over the next 3 days, Lydia and Yates fell into an easy rhythm. He would go out during the day to handle his business, meeting with ranchers and merchants, arranging future deliveries, and checking in with his contacts. In the evenings, he would return to the boarding house for dinner, and afterward, he and Lydia would sit on the front porch talking while the sun set. They spoke of everything and nothing. He told her about his trip to Dodge City, the characters he had met, the challenges of the trail. She shared stories about life at the boarding house, the personalities of the regular boarders, her growing friendship with Mrs. Henderson and the other women in town. But beneath the casual conversation, something deeper was growing. Lydia found herself noticing everything about Yates, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the thoughtful way he listened when she spoke, the gentle strength in his hands when he helped her carry firewood or water. And she saw the way he looked at her, with an admiration and warmth that made her feel beautiful despite her work-roughened hands and simple clothes. On his last evening in town, they sat on the porch as usual, but this time the conversation lagged into a comfortable silence. The summer night was warm, filled with the sounds of crickets and the distant music from one of the saloons. "I have been thinking," Yates said finally, not looking at her but out at the darkening street. "I come through Tascosa pretty regularly. If you wanted, I could make it more regular. Make it a consistent stop on my route." Lydia's heart was pounding. "Why would you do that?" Now he did look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her catch her breath. "I think you know why, Lydia. These past 6 weeks, you have been on my mind more than is probably wise for a man who spends most of his time on the trail. And these last few days, being here, talking with you, I have been happier than I have been in a long time." "I have thought about you too," Lydia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every day since you left, I kept wondering if you were safe, if you would really come back like you said you would." "I will always come back," Yates said firmly. "If you want me to, I do," Lydia said. "I really do." Yates reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. The touch sent electricity through Lydia's entire body, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "I know this is not conventional," Yates said. "I am on the trail more than I am anywhere else. I do not have much to offer beyond a good horse and honest work, but I would like to court you properly if you will have me." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes, but these were tears of happiness, not sorrow. "I would be honored." They sat there on the porch, hands clasped, making quiet plans for the future. Yates would return every 2 weeks, spending a few days in Tascosa each time. They would use that time to get to know each other better, to build something real and lasting. True to his word, Yates returned exactly 2 weeks later, and 2 weeks after that, and again through the summer and into the fall of 1878. Each visit brought them closer together. They took walks along the Canadian River, attended church services together when the circuit preacher was in town, and spent countless hours talking on the boarding house porch. Mrs. Henderson watched their courtship with approval, occasionally chaperoning when propriety demanded, but giving them enough freedom to truly know each other. The other women in town began to treat Lydia with the special kindness reserved for a woman who was clearly being courted by a good man. Lydia learned more about Yates with each visit. She learned that he was unfailingly honest in his business dealings, which was why ranchers and merchants trusted him with valuable cargo. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh even on her hardest days. She learned that he was thoughtful and considerate, always bringing her small gifts from his travels, a pretty ribbon from Dodge City, a book from a general store in another town, once a delicate silver hairpin that must have cost him a significant portion of his earnings. Yates learned about Lydia too. He discovered her strength, the way she had built a new life from nothing after being abandoned. He saw her kindness in how she treated the boarding house guests, patient with the difficult ones, warm with the lonely ones. He admired her intelligence, the way she could discuss books and current events, her curiosity about the world beyond Tascosa. As autumn turned the grasslands golden and the air gained a crisp edge, their relationship deepened from courtship to something more profound. They were in love, both of them knew it, though neither had quite said the words yet. It was on a clear October evening that Yates finally spoke what was in his heart. They were walking along the river, the setting sun painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Yates stopped and turned to face Lydia, taking both her hands in his. "Lydia, these past months with you have been the best of my life. When I am on the trail, all I can think about is getting back to you. When I am here, I do not want to leave. I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Lydia felt joy burst through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Yates, so much." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a gentle, reverent kiss that spoke of promises and future and the beginning of something beautiful. When they finally pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. "I will need to make some changes to my route," Yates said, already planning. "I cannot expect you to wait weeks between visits once we are married. And I have been thinking, there is enough freight business in this area that I could base myself out of Tascosa, make shorter runs to the surrounding ranches and towns. It would not be as much money at first, but it would mean coming home to you every few days instead of every few weeks. I would like that, Lydia said, but only if it is what you want too. I do not want you to give up work you love for me. I love you more than I love traveling, Yates said simply. And honestly, I am ready to have a real home again, especially if that home is with you. They married in November in a simple ceremony at the boarding house with Mrs. Henderson, the doctor and his wife, Miss Winters, and a handful of townspeople in attendance. Lydia wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Chen had helped her make, a simple but elegant design in deep blue fabric that Yates had brought back from Dodge City specifically for this purpose. Yates wore a new shirt and vest, his boots polished to a shine, his hair neatly trimmed. When he saw Lydia coming down the stairs, his eyes filled with such love and awe that she felt like the most beautiful woman in the world. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, his voice ringing out as they exchanged vows. Yates slipped a simple gold band on Lydia's finger, and she did the same for him, both of them speaking their promises with voices that shook with emotion. I, Yates Turner, take you, Lydia Lancaster, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand by you through whatever comes, for as long as we both shall live. I, Lydia Lancaster, take you, Yates Turner, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you, for as long as we both shall live. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her tenderly while their small group of friends and neighbors applauded. Mrs. Henderson had prepared a wedding dinner, and they celebrated late into the evening with good food, music from a fiddle player who happened to be passing through, and the warm feeling of community. Yates had rented a small house on the edge of town, a modest two-room structure with a stone fireplace, a well in the yard, and a small barn for his horses. It was not much, but to Lydia, who had been living in a single room at the boarding house, it felt like a palace. Their first night as husband and wife was sweet and tender, both of them nervous but eager. Yates was gentle and patient, making sure Lydia felt safe and cherished. They learned each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's hearts, with care and growing confidence. Afterward, lying in Yates's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Lydia felt a contentment she had not known was possible. This man, who had found her at her lowest point and had chosen to help her, to love her, to build a life with her, was now her husband. The journey that had seemed so bleak when she woke up abandoned by her wagon train had led her here, to this moment, to this love. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, his fingers running gently through her hair. "I am thinking about how strange life is," Lydia said. 6 months ago, I thought I had lost everything. I was sick and alone and certain I was going to die in that empty field. And now I am here, married to you with a home and a future. It almost does not seem real." "It is real," Yates assured her, holding her closer. "And it is just the beginning. We have so much ahead of us, Lydia, so many years to build something together." "Tell me what you see," Lydia said. "When you think about our future, what do you see?" Yates was quiet for a moment, and Lydia could feel him thinking, choosing his words. "I see us making this house into a real home. Maybe adding on a room or two as we need them. I see building up the freight business until we are comfortable, not rich but secure. I see children, if we are blessed with them, teaching them to ride and to raid and to be kind. I see growing old with you, sitting on our porch watching the sunset just like we used to do at the boarding house. I see a good life, Lydia, a simple but happy life." Lydia felt tears slip down her cheeks. "That sounds perfect. The winter of 1878 was hard but happy. Yates restructured his freight business as he had planned, taking shorter runs to nearby ranches and settlements. It meant less money initially, but it also meant he was home most nights, and the value of that far outweighed the financial sacrifice. Lydia continued to help Mrs. Henderson a few days a week, both for the extra income and because she had grown to love the older woman like family. She also began to establish herself as someone who could sew and mend clothes, taking on work from families in town who needed dresses altered, shirts mended, or quilts made. Together, she and Yates built a life. They worked hard during the day and held each other at night. They learned to navigate the small conflicts that arise when two people share a life, discovering when to push and when to compromise. They made friends in the community, became known as a solid, reliable couple. As winter gave way to spring in 1879, Lydia began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Yates, wanting to be sure. When she finally shared the news one evening after dinner, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy that probably woke half the town, swept her into his arms, and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. Then he set her down gently, his hands on her still flat stomach, his eyes full of wonder. "A baby," he said reverently. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Lydia asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Yates said. "I am terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can barely stand it. We are going to be parents, Lydia. We are going to have a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Lydia suffered through morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon and fatigue that made the simplest tasks exhausting. But Yates was wonderful, taking over more of the household chores, making sure she ate even when food made her nauseous, holding her when the emotions became overwhelming. Mrs. Henderson and the other women in town rallied around Lydia, offering advice, sharing their own experiences, preparing baby clothes and supplies. Mrs. Chen, whose husband was the doctor, promised to be present at the birth to assist. As Lydia's belly grew through the summer months, she and Yates spent their evenings making plans. They added a small room onto the house to serve as a nursery. Yates built a cradle with his own hands, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk. Lydia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, each stitch an act of love for the child she had not yet met. In late October, a full year after their wedding, Lydia went into labor. It was long and painful, lasting through the night and into the next day. Yates stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, speaking words of encouragement even when she was too exhausted to respond. Finally, with Mrs. Chen's skilled assistance and Mrs. Henderson's support, Lydia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the doctor placed the tiny, squalling infant in her arms, Lydia felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He is perfect," she whispered, studying the baby's tiny fingers, his scrunched-up face, the shock of dark hair on his head. Yates, who had tears streaming down his face, leaned over to kiss first Lydia's forehead and then the baby's. "He looks like you," he said. "He looks like himself," Lydia corrected with a tired smile. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Yates said, "I was thinking about Thomas after my father, Thomas Turner. What do you think?" "I think it is perfect," Lydia said. "Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world." Baby Thomas was a good-natured child who nevertheless kept them busy day and night. Lydia had to step back from her work with Mrs. Henderson and her sewing business to focus on mothering, though Mrs. Henderson came by frequently to help and to coo over the baby. Yates proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with Thomas, willing to walk the floor with him at night when he was fussy, happy to change diapers and give baths. Watching her husband with their son, Lydia fell in love with him all over again. The years that followed were full and rich. Yates's freight business grew steady and reliable, earning them enough to live comfortably if not luxuriously. Lydia returned to her sewing work once Thomas was a bit older, working during his naps and in the evenings, building a reputation for fine needlework that brought customers from surrounding ranches. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic little boy who loved horses just like his father. By the time he was 3, he was begging to go on deliveries with Yates, and Yates started taking him on the shorter, safer runs, teaching him about the land and the business. In the spring of 1882, Lydia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In December, she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Lydia's mother. Margaret was a tiny, delicate baby with Lydia's green eyes and a temperament that was simultaneously sweet and stubborn. With 2 young children, life became busier than ever. The little house on the edge of Tascosa was full of noise and laughter, toys scattered on the floor, the constant motion of family life. Yates added another room and then another, the house growing to accommodate their growing family. In 1885, they welcomed another son, Henry, and in 1888, their youngest daughter, Catherine. 4 children meant organized chaos, but it was a chaos filled with love. Yates taught the children to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Lydia taught them to read using the books that Yates brought back from his travels. Together, they instilled values of hard work, honesty, and kindness. Thomas showed an early aptitude for the freight business and began accompanying Yates on most of his runs by the time he was 12. Margaret had her mother's gift for sewing and her father's head for numbers, helping Lydia with the sewing business and eventually taking over much of the bookkeeping. Henry was the family scholar, always with his nose in a book, dreaming of becoming a teacher. Catherine was the adventurer, wild and free-spirited, determined to see the world beyond Tascosa, through it all. Through the hard years and the good years, through sickness and health, Lydia and Yates's love only grew stronger. They still sat on their porch in the evenings when they could steal a quiet moment, watching the sunset just as Yates had once envisioned. They held hands across the dinner table during family meals. They supported each other through challenges and celebrated each other's successes. Tascosa itself changed over the years. The town grew and evolved, new businesses opening, more families settling in the area. Some of the rougher elements moved on as the frontier became more civilized. The railroad came through in the early 1890s, bringing new opportunities and changing the nature of Yates's freight business. He adapted, shifting focus from long-distance hauling to local delivery and supply, staying relevant as times changed. Mrs. Henderson eventually retired and sold the boarding house, moving into a small house near Yates and Lydia. She became like a grandmother to their children, a beloved fixture in their lives until she passed peacefully in her sleep in 1895. As the 19th century drew to a close and the 20th century began, Lydia and Yates found themselves becoming the older generation, the ones younger couples came to for advice, the ones who remembered when Tascosa was little more than a trading post. Their children grew up and began making their own lives. Thomas married a rancher's daughter and took over the freight business entirely, expanding it beyond anything Yates had imagined. Margaret married a merchant from Amarillo and moved there but visited often with her growing family. Henry fulfilled his dream of becoming a teacher, teaching at the school in Tascosa where he had once been a student. Catherine, true to her adventurous spirit, married a surveyor and traveled with him throughout the Southwest, sending letters full of exciting stories that Lydia treasured. By 1905, Yates and Lydia had 11 grandchildren with more on the way. Their hair had gone gray, their faces lined with the years, but their love remained constant. They had lived through enormous changes, from the raw frontier days to the beginning of the modern era. They had survived hardships and celebrated joys. They had built something lasting. On a warm June evening in 1905, Lydia and Yates sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the past 27 years of marriage. Their children and grandchildren had just left after a large Sunday dinner, and the house was blissfully quiet. "You remember the day we met?" Lydia asked, leaning her head on Yates's shoulder. "Every detail," Yates replied, putting his arm around her. "You were standing there by that tent, trying to look brave even though you were scared to death. I knew right then that you were someone special." "I was terrified," Lydia admitted. "I thought I was going to die out there alone. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not even known to make." "Best decision I ever made, changing my route that day," Yates said. "Everything good in my life came from that choice." Lydia turned to look at her husband, this man who had saved her life and then filled it with love beyond measure. "I never imagined I could be this happy. After my parents died, after my aunt and uncle abandoned me, I thought happiness was something that happened to other people. But you gave it to me. You gave me everything." "We gave it to each other," Yates corrected gently. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, Lydia. I was so lonely before I met you, just drifting from place to place with no real purpose beyond the next job. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to build something permanent. You made my life matter." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors they had watched together for nearly 3 decades. Around them, Tascosa settled into evening, lanterns being lit in windows, the sounds of families gathering for dinner, the peaceful rhythm of a town at rest. "We have had a good life," Lydia said softly. "The best," Yates agreed. "And it is not over yet. We still have years ahead of us, God willing. More grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch, more time together." "I love you," Lydia said, the words as true and necessary as they had been on the day they first spoke them. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Yates replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always have, always will." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, Yates and Lydia Turner remained on their porch, hand in hand, surrounded by the life they had built together. The journey that had begun with abandonment and rescue had led to this, a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the human capacity to build joy from hardship. In the years that followed, they continued to be pillars of the Tascosa community, watching their children and grandchildren flourish, welcoming each new addition to the family with joy. They grew old together gracefully, their love a beacon for the younger generations, proof that true partnership could weather any storm. When Lydia passed away peacefully in 1918 at the age of 60, surrounded by her family, Yates held her hand and whispered words of love until her final breath. He followed her less than a year later, his heart unable to bear the separation for long. They were buried side by side in the Tascosa cemetery, their headstones simple but inscribed with words that told their story. Together in life, together in death, together in love eternal. Their children and grandchildren would tell their story for generations. The tale of the cowboy who found a woman abandoned on the prairie and changed his route to save her, not knowing that in doing so, he was saving himself. It became a family legend, passed down with pride, a reminder of where they came from and the love that founded their family. The little house on the edge of Tascosa that Yates had expanded room by room stood for many years as a monument to their life together. Eventually, as Tascosa itself began to decline and newer towns drew people away, the house fell into disrepair. But the story lived on, a tale of the Old West that was not about gunfights or gold rushes, but about something far more precious and enduring. It was a story about second chances, about finding love in unexpected places, about the courage to build a new life from the ashes of the old. It was about the strength of a woman who refused to give up even when abandoned and alone, and the goodness of a man who chose compassion over convenience. Most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple, the kind that reminded people that even in the harshest environments, even in the roughest times, love could not only survive but thrive, creating beauty and meaning that lasted far beyond a single lifetime. Lydia and Yates Turner had started with nothing but each other, and had built a legacy of love that their descendants carried forward into the new century and beyond. Their story became part of the fabric of Texas history, a reminder that the real pioneers were not just those who conquered land, but those who conquered loneliness, fear, and hardship with the simple but profound choice to love and to keep loving, no matter what challenges arose. In the end, that was the true measure of their success, not in wealth accumulated or land conquered, but in love given and received, in family created and nurtured, in a partnership that exemplified the best of what two people could build together. From that desperate morning, when Lydia woke to find herself abandoned to the peaceful evenings of their later years watching sunsets from their porch, their journey had been one of transformation, redemption, and the enduring power of love to change everything. And so their story ended not with sorrow, but with celebration, a life well lived together, a love story that proved that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, and that the best routes are the ones we change to help someone in need. For in helping them, we often find ourselves saved as well.